Well, you already heard you have the risk here. We have Andrew Seeley here. And we have our favorite Mavericks insider, Nick Angstad, joining us. Now, Nick, Andrew touched on this, but Max Christie has been a pleasant surprise as part of this Luka Doncic, Anthony Davis headlined trade. I think he's played better than anyone, that includes Nico Harrison, but anyone could have anticipated since joining the roster through his first few games as a Dallas Maverick. What has either surprised or impressed you the most?
Yeah, there's probably nothing that would make this trade good in a lot of Mavericks fans' eyes. They're going to be upset. There's going to be frustration still around this trade. But if you're going to get something out of a trade like this, at least it could be a young guy, 22-year-old guy that can fill in some gaps. I think he could be a starter for the Mavericks as soon as the end of this year or next year even. He has proven so much for the Mavs. He can get his own shot. He can shoot the three. He can play some really good defense. Has had some really good stops all over the court. He's just shown a lot for this Mavericks team. And the one thing that made the Paul George trade great for the Thunder is that SGA became an MVP, and like they just completely forgot about it. Now, I don't think Max Christie is going to do that, but if he becomes, you know, a fringe all-star type player, then maybe the hurt hurts a little bit less for Mavericks fans in the future.
I was going to say, and seeing Max on the court with this entire lineup, and not the entire lineup, obviously a lot of them have been out recently, but how they space the floor, how they guard, especially on the wing position, it is exactly the kind of style that Nico seemed to be leaning on, that he wanted on this team. Defensive first, aggressive mindset on the ball, and even seeing him take some late game shots, I mean, he rises to the occasion, Nick. There's no other way to put it.
That's absolutely right. He was absolutely clutch in the game the other night. And the Mavericks are going to be without their bigs for at least, like, at minimum a month. And so they're going to have to play that switchy style where everybody has to guard everybody and you have to defend up and you have to do a bunch of things like that. And Max Christie is really well made for that. And so it's good that they have somebody like that. Hopefully Caleb Martin coming back from injury. Hopefully PJ Washington coming back from injury after the All-Star break. And so the Mavericks could be positioned to at least weather the storm. Again, another storm for the Mavs. Maybe this one self-inflicted, but they will weather the storm, and Max Christie is part of that.
He's been a starter for their last couple games, and that is because they are down to basically, 9 available players right now.
I'm about to suit up, I think. That's where we're heading.
I guess when you think about the fact that they have won 5 of their last 6, and let's not forget that, yes, the trade happens. They have a massive blowout loss to Cleveland. After that, yes, they lose to the 76ers, but by 2. And then since that game, they haven't lost other than that overtime loss at home to the Kings. I guess when you think about all that they've been able to do with who they have left, how shocking is it that they're even able to win or go on a stretch like this?
This Mavericks team fights, Michelle. Like, that's what they do. They continue to go out there and fight, and that has been something that is kind of new for this Mavericks team. The last couple of years, it's been a team that plays up and down to competition, and you try to have to figure out, all right, which Mavericks team is going to show up today. That has not been the case this season. Doesn't matter who's on the court, who's wearing the jersey. It doesn't matter. They've been out there. And yeah, they're 2 shots away from being 6-1 since the trade, which is kind of wild in all this. The Mavs fans have been as frustrated and angry as they've ever been, but the team is actually playing well in this stretch, and they don't have players, right? They only had Anthony Davis for 30 minutes of the very first game and all that. And so it has been very interesting to see how well this team has played. And I think it's all just grit and determination, and it's guys stepping up into their opportunities.
I know heading into this stretch, we were kind of thinking they're about to weather some tough competition, but the Warriors win. That was the one where everyone kind of put everything together. Kyrie going for 42. That felt like the Mavs basically saying, we are still in this thing, Nick.
Yeah, just saying that, hey, like, we still got to step up. And I think Kyrie and Klay Thompson have stepped up in massive ways to say, hey, we're veterans, and we're going to show these other guys what needs to happen in a crisis situation. Klay Thompson has had Kevin Durant leave his team. That's not the same as Luka getting traded, but it is like a star level player leaving your team. Kyrie has played when LeBron has left, right? Like there have been moments when these guys have had to step up after huge, absolutely massive exits to their team. And so I think those 2 guys leading the way has shown a lot to these younger guys, and then having guys like Max Christie and some others step up in big ways.
I still think it's absolutely crazy when you have a guy who's 6'5" doing your jump ball situations, which was the case a couple times this past week. Nick, I also think we have to give some credit to Jason Kidd. You think about the fact that he is told he's getting Anthony Davis, and he knows that he's had Daniel Gafford, who's been relatively healthy all season.
And PJ.
Yeah, and you think about the fact that if they can go big with that caliber of player, like, that's what you kind of build your defense, at least build your game plan around. Does he deserve some credit, and does he deserve some flowers in this situation, despite him no-showing his press conference after that heartbreaker?
Just throw that in there.
Yeah, just the no-show. I don't know. He's just been coaching his butt off the last couple of games. Maybe he just needed a break after that one. But I think that the thing about Jason Kidd is he was billed and he has been a player's coach. He's a coach that connects with players. Doesn't matter who you are, he should be able to come in, and Jason Kidd can relate to that player because he's been there. He's been in that spot. He was a role player at the end of his career. He was an all-star player. He was an all-NBA type player. He was an MVP. He was the best player on the team. He was second best. He's filled in all these different gaps as a player. And so for him to be able to relate to guys like that, he's had guys stay ready. I mean, you think about the playoffs last year when Tim Hardaway Jr. wasn't really playing, and then game 2 against the Thunder, he comes in and scores 17 points, and the Mavs don't win that game unless Tim Hardaway Jr. steps up in that big way when he hadn't played. And so keeping guys ready and keeping guys engaged while they're not getting minutes, because he's talked about several times in his pressers, what's the only way to motivate players? Shots and minutes. So he's found a different way to motivate players besides shots and minutes. And guys like Kessler Edwards and Omax Prosper have stepped up in big ways when they were getting no playing time at all.
He's going to need to figure out a way to keep those guys motivated for the 26 games remaining on the schedule. That is more, we have more on that coming up here after the break. But right now, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll join you right back here after this.
Welcome back to the Ultimate Dallas Sports Show. There's no better way to get into this than Adam Silver had some interesting comments over the weekend, Michelle.
He certainly did. At All-Star Weekend, you'd think that when you have the best players in the NBA in one place, that's what people would be talking about. But no, he was asked, his first question asked when made publicly available.
Great reporting, by
was
the way.
about what was called the trade. They labeled it the trade. Of course, referring to the Anthony Davis, Luka Doncic headline trade. And Nick, I want to get your thoughts on a couple things that stood out in Adam Silver's answer. The first of which was him just flat out saying, look, I was surprised. I had no idea that a trade of that caliber was going on. Typically, those types of trades aren't made public or, made of knowledge to the league when it's someone of that caliber.
Thinking back to Chris Paul, for instance, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, but he was shocked. He also went on to say, look, I have spoken with new management. There is no intention to move this team out of Dallas. And he finished with, hey, Mavericks fans, I think you need to now more than ever believe in your organization, believe in this team. And those comments, like even just in sequential order right now, repeating them, were a lot to digest. So I just want to get your take on Adam Silver's comments on the trade and whether or not you're taking everything at face value.
Yeah, the statement that he said was, I have no doubt whatsoever they're committed to the long-term success of the franchise. Are they? Like that's the thing for Mavericks fans that I'm hearing from everybody. I've talked to so many Mavericks fans since the trade happened. We're all calling it the trade too. And with that, like what are you believing in? Are you believing in a franchise that wants a quick fix, that wants to, all right, let's try and shorten our window and win right now because Nico Harrison sees long-term success as 4 years? That's literally what he said in his press conference that he did, that 4 years was long-term. So what is actually long-term success? Luka Doncic was supposed to be long-term success. You had a 25-year-old superstar, and if you weren't willing to pay him, then who are you willing to pay? And how did you set up your franchise for long-term success? Every star in the world that's all talking about it right now at All-Star just saw what you did and how you handled a star player. Didn't tell him he was going to get traded him in the middle of the night, sent him to a team that he wasn't expecting and all that when he was buying a house in DFW and he was ready to commit to your franchise long term, or at least he says he was. And so I'm confused of all this, but what's Adam Silver supposed to say, right? He's the head of like the 30 governors of all this. One time I was in a press conference with Adam Silver and he said, my job is very unique in that I oversee 30 different businesses and only one of them succeeds every year. And so he has to like ride a bunch of lines every single year. So I kind of get it, but it does fall really flat when it says believe in a franchise when it doesn't seem like the franchise believed in the franchise player.
Yeah, I mean, it's the longevity of it. Like that's ultimately where this entire conversation falls short. And we can kind of argue back and forth about the payment of Luka on some level. And some people would have thought Luka would probably force his way out after this next contract, which would have been in that 4-year window. And we can go down that rabbit hole. But ultimately, that's where Nico saw this. It's like, if this is going to come to a head in 4 years anyway, let's just cut bait now and try and get something out of the talent that we have. And I think the bigger question for me, if you're going to believe in this front office, And I'll be the first to admit, I have been shocked by a lot of the play that I've seen over the last 6 games or so, how this team has composed itself and how different it felt seeing Davis on the court as the center of action and seeing how big they played, how physical they were, how much they dominated possession, him wiping opponents' possessions off the board with quality rebounds. I mean, it was a different Mavericks team and a different Mavericks intensity. So at least on that level, I think I do kind of trust that part of the vision. I agree that I don't trust the longevity of it, Nick. So I'm curious, where do you stand on where the Mavs are right now? Do you believe that even if it doesn't work on the 10-year span, is there a chance that this works in the 4-year window?
I mean, sure, it could. The other thing is Anthony Davis has had so many nicknames. Day-to-day Davis.
Right,
what are the other nicknames? Is that he has had some issues staying healthy in general, right? And so I get if he's healthy and he's on the court, then sure, that'd be great. But the question was with Luka, if he's healthy, if he's on the court too, and you're doing that now with a 31-year-old player that's had a history of injury instead of a 25-year-old. And so that part I just still don't understand. But to your point, the merits of the actual game being played for those glorious 30 minutes, we saw what it could possibly be with Anthony Davis. He is going to make this team massive. He's going to make this team huge, great at rebounding, strengths that the Mavericks haven't had in maybe ever in the history of the franchise are going to be strengths of this team: rim protection, rebounding, things like that. And it just depends on if he's going to play or not. And like, who could have seen this injury coming from Anthony Davis, right? He was already injured when they traded for him to begin with.
Semantics.
Rhetorical question there, Nick. But honestly, it leads us into another topic that's really relevant to that. With Anthony Davis being out for, still an undetermined amount of time, that Daniel Gafford's going to miss basically at least 6 weeks. He's probably going to be available for like the last week of the regular season if he comes back on the accelerated time available. And then you have Dereck Lively, who's still out for at least another month or so. I guess when you think about what this team needs to do over the next 26 games, over this last stretch of the regular season, do you think that they can make a legitimate playoff push with the team that they currently have? And I'm talking about the team that's actually available to play night in and night out. Or do you think that this injury-laden team is just going to ultimately fall to the unfortunate luck that has struck them throughout this season?
Yeah, one of the things about this Mavericks team this whole season, even before the trade and all that, is they've been very vague on injury timelines and on knowing when guys are going to come back. The entire season it's been that way and been frustrating. And they've even had reporting that Luka's wrist injury earlier this season was just so that he could go and get in shape, right? So I don't know what to believe about any of these injuries anymore and when somebody's going to come back. But to your point, Michelle, like just the players that are playing on the court and the ones we know are going to play, this team, they just got to stay afloat. They have one thing on their side, and that's that the Phoenix Suns have given up and are terrible. The Spurs haven't figured it out with De'Aaron Fox and Wembanyama yet. You have the Kings, who are still kind of like wallowing around where they are and haven't really taken off, and they traded Fox and went to Levine, and we'll see what happens. They had to play the Mavs overtime the other day. And the Warriors added Jimmy Butler, and so you're just hoping that one of those 3 teams, the Kings, the Warriors, the Suns, or the Spurs, at least you can't have 2 of those teams rocket past you in the standings. That's the only thing that you have to do. And I think if that's the only thing they have to do, then I think they can make the play-in, and then it's just a game, win 1 or 2 games, and then you're in. And I think the Mavericks can do that. If you have Anthony Davis and Kyrie, you can make that happen.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I have a feeling it's going to be a bit of a bait and switch if they enter as the 8 and 7, maybe half the lineup comes back all of a sudden, changes the entire dynamic, and no one has film on how to defend this team, and then you can try and guess yourself into a run because you've already had success against the Thunder team that looks like they're about to be the top seed. Either way, there's a lot of question marks for this Mavs team.